Slime Isekai Chronicles has to be one of the strangest releases of recent memory. Despite being based on a large anime and manga series, it basically received no promotion, and Bandai Namco didn't send out any review codes prior to release. But this begs the question, why? The game looked pretty cool, sporting action combat, very reminiscent of classic Tales games, paired with town building that looked pretty fun. Usually when publishers do this, it's because the game isn't very good, so they don't want to waste resources on a game that's gonna bomb. That all said, how is the game? Well, I finished it, earned the Platinum Trophy, and I'm here to tell you that it's fine. Stick around and I'll tell you more. Oh, and also, I have a North American PlayStation code for this game that's hidden somewhere in this review, so if you're the first to find it and redeem it, congrats, you get to play the game for free. So as previously mentioned, Slime Isekai Chronicles is based on the anime and manga series. In fact, a lot of the story cutscenes are just screenshots from the anime with voiceover. However, that's not all there is. There's also a large chunk of the story that's told through these sort of visual novel style cutscenes. In fact, they're very reminiscent of the Tales series skits that are so beloved by fans. I will say that if you've watched the anime, you're not going to get a ton of new story here. They're basically retelling the story from the anime. I've only watched a little bit of the show, so I don't know where it is right now or even where it ended. What I can say though is that it covers quite a few of the arcs, including obviously the very beginning when the ogres join the town, when Milim joins the town, as well as a few others. For the uninitiated, Slime Isekai Chronicles follows Rimuru, a Japanese man that was killed and reincarnated as a slime in a fantasy world. They have the power to essentially eat characters and animals and then gain their powers. Rimuru is very kind-hearted and wants to help people however they can. The plot follows them building up a quaint village of outcasts into an eventual city. Despite closely following the anime, there are a few original characters and storylines. For example, there's one with this goblin called Kataki where he's trying to get revenge for his home being destroyed and he's in constant search of power. There's also this girl Sumire who's also been isekai'd from modern day Japan that seeks your help. Overall, I didn't really find the story that interesting. I just personally find these visual novel style ways of telling stories in games to be pretty bland and boring. It's hard for me to get engaged, and the cutscenes with the screenshots from the anime just feel cheap. And to no surprise, there's no English voice acting. It's only in Japanese, but from what I can tell, it seems like they've brought back the Japanese voice cast and it was done pretty well. If you're coming into this game just as a fan of RPGs, I don't think this is going to be one that's going to hook you. I really believe the story is only worth fully experiencing if you're a big fan of the anime or manga. Where the game does excel, however, is in its awesome 2.5D action combat. Now, I know a lot of people got pretty excited for this game because it looked like a classic Tales game with its 2.5D side view action combat. And to be honest, it's actually really good, easily the highlight of the game. There's also a town building aspect that might look cool but is disappointingly simple and easy. Now, unfortunately, those two aspects are literally all there is to the game. I'm not exaggerating. There's no world map unless you count this menu as a world map. There's no towns you're going to explore outside of your one town that you're building. Basically, you get quests from your town, you go to a dungeon, fight monsters, open up chests, come back, build up the town a little bit, and rinse and repeat. That's all there is to the game. Now, just because the game is shallow doesn't mean it's not fun. Let me talk about the combat first, and then I'll get into the town building. When you enter a dungeon, you can bring up to 3 characters at a time in your party, as well as 2 assist characters. You can swap between any of the 3 characters on the fly with a press of a button, and every character has a unique moveset. Each character has a basic string of attacks. You can also launch enemies into the air, towards the ground, perform special attacks that require SP, and you also have a unique super move that shows a hand-drawn animated cutscene briefly once the meter on the bottom left is at least at 100%. Now, for everyone that got excited thinking this combat system looks like a classic Tales game, you're in luck because that's exactly what it feels like. The action combat here is fast, fluid, and really fun. It's super satisfying to pull off a big combo, and honestly, I would say this is better than some of those classic Tales games because it's much faster and a lot easier to string together combos. What's fun is that it's sort of like a fighting game. If you knock an enemy towards the far right or the far left of the screen, they sort of bounce off the edge of the screen and then you can continue comboing them in the air. When you look at it, it might look simple, but I imagine that people that want to take the time to do it can put together some amazing combos. Now, there's one other wrinkle to keep in mind in combat. At some point, enemies start having shields that you need to break through before you can actually damage their actual HP. Now, you could whittle these down with basic attacks, but it's most effective to use either your SP magic attacks or one of your big specials. Now, since Shuna uses spells for her normal attacks, I advise to pretty much always have her in your party. There's also a perfect dodge that, if done successfully, you can follow up quickly with an attack that does a lot of shield damage. Now, I won't lie, the game can get pretty repetitive pretty quickly because literally all you're doing is walking walking through these dungeons and building up your town. However, the game does have a pretty large roster of playable characters, so if you ever get bored with one, you can just swap them out for someone new. In fact, you don't even need to bring Rimuru with you most of the time. And each character's moveset is pretty drastically different. For example, Rimuru is pretty balanced all around, using a mix of katanas and spells. Shuna uses spells and is best from range, and Soa uses dual daggers and attacks quickly like a ninja. There's over a dozen characters in total, including new original characters and a secret character unlocked after you complete the game. Speaking of completing the game, once you finish it, a new map called the Memory Artifact unlocks. Basically, this is a string of powered up boss fights. Once you beat one, more will unlock, so on and so on until you complete the entire thing. I only did this so I could get the platinum trophy because by the time I finished the game, the idea of doing even more battles seemed tiresome. But for those that really love the combat and want to try out the new character that unlocks once you beat the game, it's probably worth giving a go. Now, what's a good modern JRPG without some sort of bonding system? Now, don't get too excited because once again, like everything in this game, it's pretty shallow. About midway through the game, you unlock bonds with your characters. Basically, the more you bring certain characters with you into combat, the more their bond will increase. And once their bond reaches 100%, you then gain the ability to use one of those characters' special moves. Unfortunately, there's no cutscenes between these characters where they get to know each other better. It's literally just unlocking an extra move for Rimuru. And honestly, this ended up being pretty useful because there is one special move on another character that I didn't like playing that worked really well for Rimuru. So this might be worth playing around with just to see which moves you like best. Each character also has their own level up grid. You earn points in combat that you can then spend on this grid to increase HP, defense, things like that. Now you could spend these individually the way you want, or you could just have the game do it automatically. At the beginning, I did it at my own pace because I wanted to prioritize HP and attack, but as the game went on, I kind of just let the game do it automatically because it didn't really matter. Overall, the game is pretty easy, even on normal mode, and unfortunately there's no difficulty above that, so if you're pretty good at action games, then this game is going to be a breeze for you. In fact, during my nearly 20 hours playing this game, I only died once. So that pretty much covers the combat. Now let's move over to the town building. At the very beginning, you're stuck with a pretty small plot of land in the middle of a forest. All buildings are pretty simple and run down, but by the time the game is over, you'll be building a sprawling city. Now, what exactly is the point of building up this city outside of just for story reasons? Well, actually, each building unlocks either a new facility that can have some sort of use, like the hot spring, or it gives you permanent stat buffs. At the beginning, all the buildings give you relatively small stat increases, but as the game progresses to each chapter, new buildings become available, and the stat increases become much more substantial. Now, this is gonna sound weird, but I almost wish creating these buildings was harder. Like if there's a little bit of grinding involved, kind of like how Monster Hunter does with its gear. At almost any given point, I pretty much always had the required materials to build the buildings. When exploring the dungeons, fighting monsters, and opening chests, you're just showered with material, so you almost always have enough to build whatever you want. This part of the game felt so easy that it was almost pointless. The other part that's a little bit frustrating with the town building is that you can't really interact with it at all. Sure, you can go to a particular building and get a small stat increase for your next quest and go to the hot springs to increase a random character's luck for 3 quests, but that's it. You can't talk to any of the townsfolk, you can't go into any of the buildings. It might as well just be a menu. From a visual standpoint, the game is pretty underwhelming. Like I mentioned before, there's quite a few cutscenes that are just straight up screenshots from the anime, and a lot of the other cutscenes are just the skit style presentation like you would see in the Tales games. The actual in-game character models have this very chibi look, which I'm not a big fan of. They don't look bad necessarily, I just don't really prefer this style. The environments are also pretty basic. Outside of the town, you're gonna go to a lot of the same looking environments like a forest area or a lake area. They're not super detailed as they're from a side view perspective. Music-wise, it's also pretty forgettable. I played this game for nearly 20 hours and I honestly don't remember any of the music tracks. I couldn't even tell you if they're from the anime or not, as again, I haven't watched much of it. As far as performance goes, I played on PlayStation 5 and it seemed to run at a pretty solid 60 frames per second. There were really only a few hiccups that I ever saw. One is that when the game swaps to a different character, the game kind of stutters. It's not very smooth, like it's not instantaneous, so I wish they could have smoothed that out. There was also this selling bug that I came across. Maybe I'm just looking at this wrong, but I was supposed to get a ton of money, but then when it did all the math, I only got like a few hundred gold. I think they forgot to carry a few zeros. That seemed to be a one-time only thing, as whenever I sold items going forward, it wasn't a big deal. The game also crashed on me once, but again, that only happened once and never again. Slime Isekai Chronicles had potential with its great action combat and town building aspects. However, the game is just incredibly shallow. Unless you're really into the anime or really like this combat system, it's kinda hard to recommend this game. To be fair, it is releasing at a discounted price of only $50, and there's quite a bit of content for that price. It took me about 17 hours to get the Platinum Trophy, but there were quite a few side quests that I didn't finish, so I could easily see someone taking 20 to 25 hours if they really took their time with it. I do think it could be worth a playthrough at a discount sometime later. Right now, we're on the cusp of a bunch of really big JRPGs about to come out, so honestly, I think your money would best be spent elsewhere. Now, if you want to hear about a great game that also released for $50 recently, but I think is way more worth your money, check out my review for Tokyo Xanadu EX Plus on Nintendo Switch. It's an amazing game that I think you'll absolutely love.